In this course, we'll be adding database connectivity to a static animated GIF library called Giflib. You may be familiar with this project from an earlier course. If you have this code and want to use it, just know that our starting point here is a bit different from where we left off. I've created a GitHub repo that will be our starting point. We'll start by highlighting the existing organization of the application so you'll be able to see the differences. Let's head to IntelliJ now. In IntelliJ, you'll want to import the project I've made available to you, either by downloading the zip file or by cloning the GitHub repository. Check the teacher's notes for info on the GitHub repository option. After importing, you should have the same project structure that you see here. Let's take a few minutes to talk about what's in this project. First, this is a Gradle project, which means you'll find a build.gradle file here, which is the one that I have open. In this build file, you'll see a line for the Spring Boot Gradle plugin, as well as dependencies down the line here for the Spring Boot Starter Timeleaf library and the Hash IDs library. This library allows us to easily generate unique hashes for our GIFs. These hashes are unique identifiers that are separate from the IDs we'll assign to each GIF. You've probably seen this floating around on the internet with URL shortening services like t.co for Twitter. In a moment, I'll show you how to configure the hash ID functionality so that it's available for auto-wiring into components like controllers. Next, we have our typical directory structure that aligns with the Java plugin of Gradle, with source/main/java as the root for our application source code, and source main resources being the place where we put anything that needs to be on the class path, as well as the place to put static assets for our web app located in the static directory. And Timeleaf templates are in here as well. If I expand templates, I'll see a couple directories here. I've just organized them by entity. I see a details, form, and index page for each one of the entities we'll be describing, as well as a favorites page down here that will render a list of favorite GIFs in our application. One note about this static directory. In Spring Basics, we put our GIF image files here. Since we now want to add the ability for users to maintain this data by uploading or removing, these GIF images are no longer static data. So instead, we'll store the image data in the database. Also in the resources directory is our Hibernate configuration file, which you'll remember from Hibernate Basics. This is an XML format. Now, I'll collapse the resources directory and let's focus now on the main package of our application source code, and that's com.teamtreehouse.giflib. If I expand that, I'll see three more packages: config, model, and web. This config package is where I've put all source code that represents configuration for our Spring app. In Spring Basics, we stuck our configuration in what here I've called application.java. But ultimately, I want my Java classes to serve a single purpose. You could consider this an example of what's called the single responsibility principle, which we'll talk about later in the course. So I have all my configuration for the Timeleaf template engine in its own config file called template config, just to demonstrate what it looks like to configure a template engine in Spring. App config contains application level configuration, and in this case consists only of a bean that initializes our hash ID functionality. Now, in initializing this hash ID functionality, I construct this hash IDs object and pass it what's called a salt, which is kind of like initializing a random number generator with a seed. I'll talk later about where this value comes from. It comes from a properties file, just as a hint of what's to come. Moving on, there is the model package, which contains the classes for our two entities in this application, one for category and one for GIF. As a final note, categories in this app have colors associated with them, which is why I've included this color enum here. And you can see I have some predefined colors: aqua, blue, purple, fuchsia, orange, and gold, with their associated hexadecimal codes. That will be used in combination with our Timeleaf templates, as well as our CSS to style them on the front end. Now that you've got your project started and have a grasp of how things are organized, we're ready to move on to Hibernate configuration in Spring. Just to brush up on your Spring knowledge, why don't you answer a few questions first?